Hello, and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we've been away for a bit. You've been off in Dominican Republic.
Yes.
Teaching and interviewing people.
And watching films and meeting with filmmakers. Actually, I posted what I think is a fantastic interview with a sound person, Jose Romer Mora Acosta, who's like a really interesting person who works with sound. And I did this interview, which is on my blog, notesonfilm1.com. And actually, I want to do a whole series of interviews on that because I find it thrilling, to talk to a person whose job it is, and they can teach you kind of what they try to do, what they succeed in doing, what's involved in the doing, right? Yeah. So, that was fascinating, really. And one almost never talks to below the line people, to those technicians, so kind of, what he was saying about using old microphones and how you get different sound qualities with old microphones and, how he restores them to get those particular qualities of sound, right? I mean, I found all of that fascinating. And the two things that he said that stayed with me is that he sees sound as recording emotion, the kind of sound can create feelings. And more than that, particularly on the play with off-screen sound and and diegetic space, that the off-screen sound kind of creates the world in which what you see happens, Yeah. Which I thought was kind of, brilliant, really. Like, you kind of know it, but it's just so interesting to have, a sound person articulated in those ways. So, anyway, that's not what we're here to discuss.
That's not what we're here to talk about today, though.
Yeah.
So we saw Annihilation the other day. We saw it on Tuesday evening.
It's now Friday evening.
Yes. Friday afternoon. So what happened was Annihilation is this new film from Alex Garland, written and directed. It's based on a novel by someone else. So it's not a completely original, The Beach was him based on his own. That's his screenplay based on his own novel, and also Ex Machina, I think, was completely original and directed by him as well. This is based on an existing novel by somebody else. But what's kind of interesting about it is that it's one of these that was being bought by Netflix. So it's not a Netflix original. It's not made by Netflix. Although Netflix is very keen to put their branding all over the fucking thing and call it a Netflix original whenever they can. It's not. It was made by Paramount and released theatrically in the United States. And they basically seem to have decided that we're not sure this has got legs for an international release. We think it's too intellectual. We don't think it'll make much money. We'll sell it to Netflix and make it freely available to everyone. So I've been very pissed off about this because films should be seen at the cinema, and that's Netflix is the absolute antithesis to that. We talked about it the other week with Amazon. Amazon at least respects a theatrical window, then it goes on to streaming later on. Netflix doesn't do this.
Well, I'm a bit more sympathetic.
Why?
Well,
to who? To Paramount or Netflix or what?
To Paramount, in a sense, one of the things that we always have to remember is that it's a business. It's a business decision. It's kind of nothing personal. And actually nothing is stopping the film being screened for cinephiles. And actually our event was an example of that, right?
Right, so this was a one-off where the Everyman Cinema up and down the country was doing one screening on a Tuesday night, just one everywhere. Yeah. And that's what we caught. We were told about it by Lee Kemp.
Yeah, had there been queues, all over the block to see it, I'm sure they would have put another screening and so on. But actually the fact is that there wasn't.
There weren't queues, but then the film has already been out on Netflix for a little while now, and people who wanted to see it have been able to see it. Yeah. I mean, I was going to watch it eventually on Netflix because I thought there was no hope of seeing it at the cinema.
Well,
and it was only when it turned out that, when Lee told us, it's happening here, that's when I saw, okay, I'm going to put it off and watch it here once. That would be my one chance to see it at the cinema.
Well, I think two things. First, the industry has forgotten really how to release films on a small scale. So what you hear now is that basically the publicity and promotion budget for each of the major releases is, at least as expensive and often more expensive than the film itself, right? So the film did incredibly poorly, very poorly, upon its US release. So in a way, it's understandable why Paramount, wanted to make its money back and sold it to Netflix. On the other hand, it's a real pity because the film deserves to be seen on a big screen. It is a cinematic experience, so, and there has to be a better way of releasing films theatrically than doing it on 2,000 screens the way that,
Well, I mean, you think they could bring back maybe the idea of a roadshow release where instead of all of your efforts going into, the one day where we release it all in one day and then that's how it goes. You give it a film an opportunity to build up word of mouth and what's the word?
Well, to build an audience, and to expand the release
reputation.
Based on the audience reaction. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, that is a bit the way that Arrival was released last year, and Arrival is clearly a model for this film. Yeah, it's kind of a sci-fi / auteur film with a female protagonist. That is unconventional and has an art house kind of feel to it, right?
Yeah, well, they certainly share they share a certain level of dullness at the start, and they share a kind of. There's a thing on Earth that we don't really understand and we're exploring it.
Yeah. The thing about Arrival was that to me, it only really made sense at the end, right? And kind of once you make sense of the end, the whole film retroactively becomes almost great. Yeah, So it was an experience that you kind of feel while you're watching it, that you're slightly enduring it, and then the ending reinscribes your whole experience of the film.
And Annihilation is the other way around, where it makes a lot of sense and then the ending happens and it doesn't.
Okay, I don't feel that way.
Yeah. I did not love it. Which is a shame. I mean, I was worried again. I was also worried that, while I was watching it, I was just going to be fucking consumed with fury that all the circumstances had conspired that meant that this was the only time I could see it properly. As it happened, obviously, I got into it. But I felt a bit nonplussed by it, a bit let down.
Well, let's talk about it because, I loved it.
So there will be spoilers coming up.
Yes.
The stuff I've been thinking about as well, I might spoil a film called Life, which came out in 2017, have you seen Life?
I'm not sure I have. What is it about?
It's scientists on a spaceship and an alien gets loose and just starts fucking ruining their shit. It's great. It's so much fun.
Okay.
But there is a certain similarity between this and Annihilation, which if you haven't seen either of them, or if you've seen one and not the other, it's a potential spoiler. So all I'd say right now is you should go and see Life, or dig it out, because it's really, really good fun. And actually, I enjoyed it a lot more than Annihilation.
Okay, so let me just set up the plot slightly. So Natalie Portman plays this biologist who's a former soldier who's married to what's his name?
Oscar Isaac, who is a soldier who's been sent on this mission. Totally secret. She knows nothing about it. She doesn't know what it is, but he comes back, and his body begins to deteriorate. Right, and... Well, he comes back in a kind of daze. He doesn't really know anything. He doesn't respond to her. He's been away for a year. He's been away for... He has no memories. Exactly. And then his body begins to deteriorate. So she decides to go on a mission beyond the shimmer and to the lighthouse to see exactly what's happened. Now... Okay, but what's the shimmer? This is where he's been. So it turns out Oscar Isaac has been into this thing called the shimmer, which is like a big kind of oily bubble. Yes. That stretches up into the sky. It's like a force field. Right, and it's this kind of alien entity that's kind of gradually spreading out. Yes. And the scientists who are kind of stationed outside it have no idea what's going on. They just keep on sending teams of people in who keep on not coming back. And Oscar Isaac is the only one who's returned, and he's returned in this weird state. Right. So... in slightly figuring out what's going on, Natalie Portman joins the next team that's going to be going in because she was a soldier, so that's how they get her in. I mean, she's a soldier, And she's a really good doctor. He's like, yeah, okay, I totally believe that. Fine, why not? So she joins the team, and it's an all-female team going in, led by what's her face? Jennifer Jason Leigh. And they're going to go in and just going to kind of try to get to this lighthouse in the centre. It's quite vague.
Yeah, and they want to figure out what happens. The danger is there's a kind of deadline to this in the sense that, this force field is expanding, right? So the risk is that it's going to overtake this military research settlement nearby and then possibly expand onto states and the cities and states and so on.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of...
And actually, as they go into the shimmer a little later on in the film, you see a previous military station that has already been overtaken. It's expanded beyond that.
Exactly. So now the film has a very interesting structure because, it kind of... Once you finish seeing it, you realize that the whole film really begins once she herself has returned from the shimmer. And then it's structured around a series of interviews with her. Yeah, and so different timelines recur throughout the film. And the main of the action takes place within this shimmer. But there's a kind of always a going back to... this interview that she's undergoing.
Yeah, so the film is told... I think it's quite explicit. I don't think it's it's not meant to be a twist. Like, right at the start, you've got Natalie Portman sitting in a chair in a military facility, being asked questions by a doctor in, like, a radiation suit, saying what happened in there.
I know, but...
It's very clearly set up as this flashback structure.
I think it is, but nonetheless, it's an interesting and complex structure because it's not as if, there's a recounting and then a present action. There are other things in between that are like, her thoughts to another period. So for example, you see her black colleague, right, at the very beginning of the film, and then once in those flashbacks, you realize that they're having an affair, but are they having an affair while the husband is still there? Yeah? Or, so kind of... Those things become kind of... There's a complicated play on time in the film.
Okay, that didn't seem quite so complicated to me, but maybe the film's actually trying to complicate it more than it seemed. I mean, it seemed quite clear to me that she was sleeping with him while the husband was away, but maybe that's actually something that I read into it and the film is not really saying. I don't know.
Yes. Well, it seems to me that...
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't sure whether she was sleeping with him only while the husband was away, or whether it actually predated. My impression was that it was whilst the husband was there, because that whole speech about how it can't continue and no, there'll never be another time, it doesn't make sense if the husband is still away, really. Or it makes less sense.
But then also there was something about the husband, she was only with him for a very short time before he left, like... There was something about how he'd been away for longer than they'd been together, something like that.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll have to watch it again to figure that out.
I think the timeline is interestingly complicated and things are only slowly revealed. Yes, which I liked. So it's like the film sets up tensions between its own process, different moments in its unfolding. It does set up kind of interesting twists. Not that it tricks you, but just that you know more. Yeah, that things become clear, right? There's always a rhyming with previous scenes that I find very interesting. What I loved about the film was, I think I said on Facebook how unusual it is to see a female protagonist leading a band of females on a mission in a sci-fi film. And somebody said, oh no, that's not unusual at all. In fact, there was a rival and whatever. But actually, I don't think it's the same at all. I think this is like an entire, female force.
Well, it's I suppose it's notable or remarkable insofar as they're military. Although, the kind of they're set up as one of them's a biologist and one of them's a physicist and one of them does something else. But they're all military trained and then they're in military garb and they're all wielding guns. And so that seems a little bit notable.
To me, it does.
As opposed to being kind of defenseless or, kind of having other people there to protect them while they do their sciencey bits.
They're smart women with guns going on a mission in which they are expected to fight as well as use their brains
and survive. It's kind of survival. Yeah. There's almost like a Blair Witch thing going on right at the start, where everything kind of becomes, as soon as they get into the shimmer, and then they set up camp, and then they wake up and it's like, we reckon we've been here for 3 or 4 days, but none of us can remember anything. We can't even remember setting up camp, and the compasses don't work. So it becomes this kind of, we've just got to survive now.
Yes.
And that's, yeah.
I thought it was fascinating, so one of them is a lesbian, kind of the antagonist is actually not a male, or a female for that matter. Yeah, so kind of, I thought that was it's a very unusual Hollywood film. And very, very interesting in the way that it kind of it plays with the representation and genre and things like that. So that whole aspect I liked very much. I also thought it was complex. Yeah, I'm not sure I got it all. So it begins with life on Earth and how we are basically the products of single cells reproducing and mutating, right? And then kind of showing us that within the shimmer, there is a kind of a similar process of mutation, but actually the mutation that it's undergoing is a refraction of cells. So you end up with, things like, deer with antlers that are flowers, or, trees that have the shapes of humans, right? Kind of, and I thought all of those images.
This idea of cross-pollination mutation, because actually when... that's that scene you're remembering at the start where Natalie Portman's teaching a class and she's showing a video of cells dividing into 2, 4, 8, 16 and so on. That is a cancer. That's what she says.
Yes.
So it's this idea of kind of... cancer is a kind of unrestricted growth and mutation, right? In the way that all other forms of life are contained. And there's this idea in it of kind of life warring upon itself. Like cancer's this thing that kind of, it lives in a host, but it lives to destroy it. So you think, well, maybe that's the kind of analogy that's being drawn with the shimmer, that it kind of, it sits on Earth, mutating things and disrupting them, and ultimately it kind of lives only to self-destruct. And there's this other idea of self-destruction with the Jennifer Jason Leigh character, who's leading the whole pack. She has cancer, which it's implied to be terminal, and she doesn't care about how her life is going. So that's why she can kind of plow on into this thing. Because the thing is, every single team that they've sent into the shimmer has not come back, which is one of the things that was slightly annoyed me, to be honest, about the central conceit of the film, is that although they have individual motivations, these characters, for going into the shimmer. Obviously, particularly Jennifer Jason Leigh has such a desire to know what's going on in the centre of it and then she also doesn't sort of care enough about the rest of her life because she's terminal. And then you've got Natalie Portman, who needs to know what happened to her husband. The other three have sort of vague personal issues that inform them, but so they all kind of have their individual motivations to go in, but as a team, it's a fucking stupid idea. Every single time someone goes in, they don't come back out, and they just you've got the military or the government or whoever it is, and just throwing bodies at this thing that nothing happens.
Is the implication that they've done it more than once? Because my implication is that they had only done one previous mission.
No, I remember the implication. Again, we'd have to see it again to be absolutely sure. But I remember the implication being that they sent in several teams, because Oscar Isaac is quite notable as the only one who's come out of this.
Yes, I get. That was part of the previous team that went in, but I hadn't realized that it had been a series of teams.
Yeah, I think so. So when they're in the shimmer, the plot certainly becomes quite vague to me. Like they're just working their way in somewhere and having a look around.
No, they're working their way towards the lighthouse.
Yes, they're working their way towards the lighthouse, and they have these arguments about what they're going to do or not. But their behaviour is still unconvincing to me. Like they're not doing very much by way of actually investigating things, doing tests, that sort of thing.
Oh, I didn't mind that. I mean, it sets up a reason. So it sets up a rationale. So first of all, our communications are cut off, right? Because this force field affects communication with the outside. Then also what's happening is their own cells are mutating the longer they stay within this force field, the more they're mutating. They're mutating in ways that are like a crossbreeding of species, right? The other thing that's happening is that they wake up not remembering what they had done the night before, right? So the sense of like the circularity of what they're doing. So they have the feeling that they've been there 2 days and they've been there like 3 weeks or whatever, right? So and they forget what happened before. I thought all of that was quite interesting.
I didn't think it was that interesting. It felt so vague and kind of heading nowhere, and the film has a couple of effective sequences of attacks by sort of mutated creatures. One in particular is the bear in the house.
The bear's fantastic. I love the crocodile scene as well.
Yeah, the crocodile was okay. Some of the CGI work there isn't the best, actually. I think visually the film is pretty fucking astonishing.
It is.
Particularly the images of the plants that have grown in the shape of humans.
Yes.
Those are made. There's a kind of a garden for them, and it's almost like it's a graveyard. Like people, because one character has kind of been transforming into a plant in front of your eyes, and she walks off, and then she kind of go around a corner. You can't see her anymore because there's a garden full of these things, and she's just kind of must have just become one of them, which is pretty stunning. But just a couple of bits with the animals. The crocodile has that weird thing where, although the modelling is great, the rendering kind of doesn't quite sit it in the scene somehow. You can tell it's separate. And there are a couple of bits like that. But then actually, there was a Q&A with Alex Garland after the film. They showed an edited Q&A. And he was talking about how in the dance scene towards the end, where Natalie Portman is mirrored by a sort of clone of herself, that actually, because Natalie Portman was pregnant, most of that isn't her. Most of that is a dancer. And they've put her face on in CGI. And you can't tell that at all. So like...
It didn't bother me at all. I thought it was visually spectacular, both in the way that it's conceived and in terms of its concepts, right? There's often like, I don't know, like these labial or vaginal holes everywhere, right? So, kind of where there's a shot of Natalie Portman looking into, the crocodile teeth, where it's shot from the point of view as if the camera was in the crocodile. Right, and that kind of imagery, you get that in the lighthouse all the time, and it's almost
when she's
like,
looking into the hole at the end of the lighthouse.
That's right, and she's shot with that hole as a background in a lot of those shots. So I thought all of it was fantastic, actually, and I thought conceptually it was fantastic. That kind of so there's this alien life force that's kind of through this mutation, that you get this sense that might have been caused accidentally through some kind of radiation hitting the lighthouse or something, that all of a sudden kind of humans are cross-pollinating with aliens, and I thought kind of, that was done so fantastically, and it makes the ending so great.
To be fair, it doesn't seem to be with aliens exactly, although aliens, I think, more or less are showing up at the end, but most of it is the idea. So what one of the characters describes the shimmer as, it's the quantum physicist. Let's get a quantum physicist, because that just means we can have anything. And the quantum physicist says the shimmer is, as you say, refracting things. So it's not that it's not that communications through the radio are cut off. It's that they're scrambled. And the same is happening with DNA, which is why, so it's not just humans and aliens or humans and plants cross-pollinating, but absolutely everything is.
Yes.
And it does lead to these sort of interesting visuals and interesting character designs, particularly that bear that screams with a human voice, because it's kind of taken on the kind of what's left in a way of one of the characters that it's previously killed.
Yes.
And that's how it lures the one character outside, by screaming with her voice.
Yes.
That's a fantastic sequence.
That's
really
a fantastic sequence.
And it's so creepy because you've got this huge bloody great bear thing with weird looking teeth. It's almost like a giant rodent the way it looks.
Yes.
But it's screaming with a human voice in front of their faces.
Yes.
Fantastic. But like I say, there's kind of... So the film is starting to hint at these ideas of life warring upon itself, because that's how evolution works. It's like survival of the fittest, and whatever's weakest dies out against the other stuff. Life kills itself to evolve and get stronger. But it's so implicit, and it doesn't really add up to anything. What's it ultimately saying, really? Nothing.
Well, not nothing. I mean, something that starts off with a cancer, and where cancer is actually used as a springboard to talking about, life on Earth, then actually ends with a coupling, of an old form and a new form to create a distinct form. I thought it was an alien, but you're right. I think maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a mutation, right? But what's interesting is that Earth Natalie ends up with, the non-human version of her husband.
Yeah, the clone version.
The clone version of her husband, I suppose. And they end up together.
But she's been affected too. That's the thing. So this right at the very end. So when you get to the lighthouse, you see this videotape that's been taken by Oscar Isaac's team, and there's this burned out body sitting in the corner, which the video's trained on. The video's pointing at it. In the video, it's not burnt out yet. You're seeing how this body got there, and it turned out that this body was Oscar Isaac, who burnt himself to death. It's like and it's actually, I think, probably deliberately reminiscent of what's his name, Thich Quang Duc, the Buddhist. Was a Vietnamese monk who burned himself in protest.
Yes.
I'm probably butchering all of that story, but it's a famous image of the self-immolation of the priest. And I think the film is drawing on this idea of rebirth in there, the Buddhist idea of death and reincarnation. He seems to be reincarnated as something else, as this different form of himself that is alien-based, that doesn't remember anything. Then you have the same thing with Natalie Portman, except Natalie Portman sort of gets the upper hand on her clone and gets it to destroy itself and escapes. So I guess the implication is that at the end, the Natalie Portman that you've been seeing telling the story is the original Natalie Portman, but as we've seen, she has been, because you've seen her doing blood work on herself and seeing that her blood is kind of shimmering and different, it's been affected. And so what she embraces Oscar Isaac at the end, she says, "You're not," I think I can't remember his name, Dave or something. He says, "You're not Dave, are you?" And he says, "I don't think so." And they embrace, and both of their irises shimmer.
Oh.
So they're both kind of not
human.
They're not human, but maybe they're not completely alien either. There's something different going on. But it is so vague, and I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to take from this ending. I don't know.
Well, you see, to me, it was I thought it was clear to me in a way, because, and this Alex Garland also said in the Q&A, you have this enormous lighthouse, and it's on top of
a cavern,
a chamber,
yeah,
which is full of energy, So it is basically kind of, male, female, yin, yang, whatever, kind of, interacting to create a new life, right? And I think the image that you are talking about, kind of underlines that, right? So kind of, here are these two people coming together. They're both new. They're both different in some way, and their eyes shimmer to indicate that, something new is going to be created. So, kind of, we're going to be created in a different way, really.
But I don't know how sinister.
That's now outside the shimmer.
But I don't know how sinister I'm supposed to find it.
Oh, how sinister!
Do you know what I mean? I can't tell if I'm supposed to be this is a new future, or if this is they've managed to invade Earth.
I don't think you're meant to find it sinister. I think you're just meant to find it life. Yeah, that kind of. So. I don't know. And all the questions that we're raising, it really makes me want to see it again. Because I think those questions are answered by the film. It just takes maybe a little more work than I've given it, until now. Really, it kind of it did stay with me, the film, though it stayed with me more on a purely kind of visual basis. than anything else. My criticism would have been that, and actually I think I found this a criticism of Ex Machina as well, though it made more sense in Ex Machina, right? But there's a kind of alienation or an alienated feel to the characters in the whole first third of the film. Like, you know, they're all distant and so on. Yeah, it kind of, you know, it's almost like the scenes don't play. Like there's a kind of a coolness or distance or, that I thought, you know, I couldn't be sure at the beginning. Is this just that the scenes are not working or that you're meant to feel this sense of alienation, right? You know, I think that could have been done differently. You know, I think those scenes could have had more warmth and more jokes and more life. You know, I don't think you need this feeling of alienation.
I think the film is characterising Natalie Portman in, I think, quite a conventional way at the start. You know, her husband's not around and she's sort of slightly dispossessed and she's having this kind of loveless affair with this other guy.
Yes.
And she doesn't know if he's coming back and it's sort of it's doing the bare minimum work just to establish that this is kind of who this character is and that she desires this connection with her husband and doesn't understand. And it is dull as fuck, basically.
So I wouldn't say that, but it did raise questions. Actually, I mean, I think there were certain things that, you know, and this might be my own bias, my own taste, but I would have liked to have seen more warmth, life, connection, knowledge about everything, you know, all the people, like at the beginning of the film. I would have liked more action. You know, I would have liked, like, you know, in Aliens, the James Cameron, you remember Chavez, I think her name was, the butch kind of Latina in the team, right, who like fights and shoots. And I would have liked kind of all the women when they go into the, you know, inside the shimmer to have actually been given some exciting action sequences, right? Because they're not, like, you know, so there are scenes with tension, but actually there's no exciting action scenes, like, so which a little bit undermines, you know, the credit that you're giving, you know, the work for having an all women, you know, cast going into this danger. Like, I would have liked to have seen them overcome that danger, or you do some physical action with it, or show how great they are with guns.
Or it would have been nice to see them kind of interact in any way that was really remotely interesting. Like they have conversations about whether we should carry on or go back. They have conversations about what they've literally just seen, like they come across some sort of weird mutated body in a swimming pool. But actually, like, do they interact in any way that kind of really speaks to how they relate to each other or to the world as women?
Yes, I think it does. So I think, for example, at the very beginning, when one of them comes on to Natalie Portman, and she says, I might as well try, you know, I've got only a few hands left to play, or something like that, she says. You know, and then she's the one who turns on them when, you know, she realizes that she's married to this guy who, you know, she's chasing over. So, you know, I think it kind of has that resonance with the beginning, right? So, you know, kind of, you know, she's a lesbian, she's made a pass at her now. You know, there's two forms of betrayal. The fact that she hasn't told them that she was married and had a husband, you know, and so she might have many ulterior motives that puts them in danger. But also the fact that, you know, kind of she probably led her on or something, right? So
I think the first part is more important than the second. I think it's literally she's only saying, "Get off with me," on the off chance.
Well, that's true, but nonetheless, it is significant that that's the woman who gets so riled up about discovering that she's married, right?
I think that Ex Machina did much more interesting things in this respect. So I think Ex Machina is a fucking brilliant film, and I think it has such a fascinating sort of attitude and perspective and interpretation of the way that men build women as images and ideas that they can never hope to live up to, because what's in your head is you'll always find it. You know, the Oscar Isaac character in Ex Machina, he builds these women as basically kind of sex dolls that are just quiet and do what he says. There's this house full of robotic women that he rapes, essentially. Like they have such an advanced AI that they know, you know, they can experience pain and grief, I think. And then even though he's the one designing them to exactly his specifications, they can never live up to what he wants because ultimately they're not human. They're made by him, and just the knowledge that he's made them means that they miss something. And that film is... And then... I mean, I thought that film was great the first time I saw it, and then the second time I watched it kind of from the perspective of the Alicia Vikander character, who's the character that ultimately, spoilers, I guess, that ultimately kills Oscar Isaac and traps Donald Gleeson in the house and escapes to the real world. Again, somewhat similar to the end of Annihilation, that kind of it gets out and is in the real world without anyone knowing. And when I watched it from her perspective, I thought, like, obviously it's such a dark story the first time because you're watching it from Donald Gleeson's perspective, and from his perspective, he's a nice guy who's gone into this house to explore this amazing new AI and kind of be tested by this sinister Oscar Isaac, and it's right that Oscar Isaac gets his comeuppance and dies, but you feel sorry for Donald Gleeson because he's really done nothing that wrong. He's been nice, and actually he's been taken advantage of by the Alicia Vikander robot character who uses him to get out and locks him in this room. So it's terribly sort of, it's crushing the first time, but the second time I watched it, and I was thinking of it from her perspective. She's a prisoner. She's been built as a prisoner in this place to be raped and taken advantage of, and so when she meets Donald Gleeson, she sees opportunity to get out, and wouldn't you just do fucking anything you could and manipulate anyone you could to get out of this place? And if it meant leaving Donald Gleeson in this place, even though he's essentially a nice person who's done nothing wrong, if it meant leaving him there because he threatened your possibility of a good life when you got out, I totally was with her the second time. Like, actually, I think it's a really interesting sort of piece of work, sort of feminist film that is a lot kind of, it's even darker the second time in a way, but it's in a kind of really unique way. I don't think I'd ever seen anything like it. And I guess, I mean, I'm kind of banging on about Ex Machina there. The point is just to say that I think that film was such a fucking brilliant piece of work that was full of originality and things that I just hadn't seen before and hadn't considered, and made me look at things in a different way. I feel so let down by Annihilation that I didn't feel any of that. At all.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really interesting film. I think it gets richer the more I think about it. And it is kind of one of those films that I feel I want to see again. That kind of the film is offering me all I need to know. And it's just, that the nature of seeing, in a following, is that, there are things that I've missed. I mean, I know I missed, though actually that is partly the film's fault, But I do think it's one of those films that's kind of designed to be viewed several times.
I think that's true, and I think I will watch it again. But having said that, when I said let's come over today and let's do the podcast on Annihilation, because obviously it's Good Friday, so we had loads of time. And you were saying, okay, let's watch it again and then do the podcast. And I said, I don't really want to.
Yes.
That's kind of telling to me, like, even though it's free and it's right there and I can watch it in HD and all the rest, like, I don't have to download a horrible camera copy or anything to watch it twice. I didn't really fancy it.
Yeah, that is interesting. I, on the other hand, I did, so, because, kind of just the last, half an hour, 40 minutes of the film are to me so extraordinary. So I think kind of, the first 40 minutes or so, you're introduced to the characters and you're setting up the pieces and actually, like, I was a little bit uninvolved, so I think I might have just missed essential information, really. And then as soon as they got into the shimmer, I thought, wow, right, but by then, I'm sure I couldn't connect some of the pieces at the end to the beginning, right? So
it's certainly true that there's information scattered in such a way that you are meant to pick up on how it's joined together on a second and third viewing.
Yeah,
there's no question about that. It's not that straightforward.
Yeah,
and I think it's good for that. Like, I think the way that kind of Natalie Portman in particular, her character, jumps into these flashbacks that are sometimes very, very fleeting of kind of spending time in the affair, spending time with her husband and the way life used to be. And, even if they're not kind of narratively that informing, they're emotionally informing kind of where her headspace is. And I think that's really good. I think there is some really. I mean, I don't want to be too down on it. Like, I think it's really ambitious, and it's exactly the kind of film that wouldn't make any money because it is trying to do so much.
It is. It is a $40 million art movie. Yeah. You know, so that's why on the one hand, kind of, well, first it's really surprising that Paramount made it, right? And then it's hardly surprising that Paramount had to sell it to Netflix in order to get any money back, because, you know, I do think that kind of the theatrical opportunities for a film that makes so many demands on you, and that's not quite, you know, a thrilling pleasure to watch, right? It requires effort.
Yeah.
You know, I personally don't think it would have made that amount of money back.
No, it probably
any other
wouldn't.
way. So,
but I think there is a consideration that, like, you're not only in the business of making money, but you're in the business of culture. It matters that you kind of represent your work with respect and integrity.
Well, let me tell you, you know, if I were like a great filmmaker, you know, I certainly kind of wouldn't work for Paramount. You know, I mean, yeah.
Why them in particular?
So, well, because they're the ones who made this film, and right. I also agree.
Oh, I see what you mean. You know, what you mean on the basis of what happened with Annihilation?
Yeah,
you wouldn't then.
No,
if you could have helped.
I wouldn't. I mean, you know, but again, that's the trade-off that people make, right? Like, you know, if you accept this kind of budget, you know, you are accepting certain kinds of constraints. I mean, you know, if he'd made the film for $3 million and it would have gotten a kind of "Call Me by Your Name" type of release. You know, and then, like, if it makes 40 million, it's a smash hit, right? Then it's a different story.
But to be fair, Alex Garland did say in that Q&A, which I think is a really fair thing. He says all the creative decisions and the meddling or however you describe it by the studio has to happen before the film starts being made. So before the budget is approved, basically, and before you put pen to paper and say we're going to agree to this, you say we want this, we want that. And you have your discussions with the filmmakers then, and you come to an agreement on what the film is supposed to be. And then once the film is in production, or even in pre-production, it's not up to the studio anymore. Like, they've made their... That's his attitude.
Listen.
It doesn't have to, like, in other words, what he's saying is that's the way he wants to interact with studios.
Sure,
films.
But, you know, that's not the way life is or the way that history tells us that it is.
Well, right? it is as far as if you actually do have agreement of that nature with the studio, that's the way it is. And actually, what I'm getting to is I think that is exactly what's happened with this. There was no suggestion that the studio has meddled with the film.
No, but the studio wanted to.
Right, but what's happened is the studio has decided upon its release, and Alex Garland is not happy with that. He says this was made for the big screen.
Well, my understanding of the story is that the film was not working in previews. There were lots of suggestions for changes made. Alex Garland refused all those suggestions. Right. So, you know, and so fine. I think he had contractual control over it, so that the changes weren't made. This is the film that he wanted to shoot, and, you know, he made it as he made it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you know, you do have somebody who's put in, like, you know, I think it's 40 million budget, but 55, you know, with you know, some promotional spending.
Yeah.
You know, and then all of a sudden there's a chance they might never get it back, right? So, and this is a history of movies, right? The people who put up the money want to make money, and actually they normally have control. It's their money, right? So it's very well to say, okay, you sign up for this, you know, and you know what I'm doing, and I was honest with you at the beginning. It's true, that maybe is the way that things should be. But that's not the way they've been historically, because somebody who's about to lose $40 million goes, let me try and recover it. Okay.
Well, yeah, no, I agree, and I don't think there's anything that's really underhand about the way this film's been made or released. Like I say, this film was made the way that Alex Garland wanted to make it, and it wasn't to the studio's satisfaction. And they thought, if we're going to recoup our costs on this, we've got to sell it to Netflix. The problem then is that Netflix has created this environment in which it's okay to do that, and putting a film on Netflix is still basically releasing it straight to video.
I know, but you know,
I completely believe
people need a little bit of historical memory, right? Because, you know, I mean, if you go back to the 70s, so fair enough, like, films would always initially be released in a cinema, you know, but the way that most people saw it was, you know, cut with advertisements, you know, with the ratio mismanaged, with, you know, scan and span and
pan and scan.
Pan and scan. So like I suppose each
right, but they had the opportunity to watch it on a cinema screen, and if they missed it,
often not everybody did.
No, okay, not everybody, but like
because there would be regional releases.
But it would have
films would only be released in Texas.
Yeah,
so
it's not ideal. It is a good thing that people have the opportunity to see this, and everyone's got Netflix, so they can see it, and they should, and it's better than everything else that Netflix has made. Pretty much. I mean, what was I was saying to you the other day? I saw some article that was about how the big 5 studios are releasing something like 56 movies between them in the upcoming year, and Netflix on its own is releasing about 80. Netflix is flooding. It's kind of unlimited space, isn't it, on the internet? But it's flooding kind of culture with a stream of absolute shite.
Yeah.
Very, very few things that come out of it are great.
B-movies.
And one of the things that this article said was that watching Netflix originals, as in genuine Netflix originals that are made for Netflix, actually improves them, because the way that you watch stuff on Netflix is you sit there with your phone or your laptop and you're doing other stuff, you're not really paying attention. And actually, if you pay full attention to a film like Mute, then you realise that it makes no sense and it's a much worse experience for it.
Uh-huh.
That was something interesting. Like, actually, films are being designed almost to be not really watched properly.
Well, I think what's happening is a lot of them are being designed for the small screen, and that's fine, right? But there are different ways of telling a story that work better on a smaller screen, and there are ways that work much better on a large screen. And the pity is, when something made for a large screen, you don't have the opportunity to see it on a large screen, because it does. I mean, and Annihilation is a film which really loses out by being seen on a small screen.
I think that's probably true, although I haven't tried to watch it on a small screen yet. But nonetheless, you can tell that some of those images, they really sing in a cinema.
Yeah.
There are a couple of other things I wanted to pick up on. One of them was there is a really convincing and I think quite beautiful, although brief, depiction of two people in love. And it's done through these flashbacks. There's this image which you picked up on in particular of Natalie Portman's arching back as she's had sex with, I guess, his husband at some other.
No, I guess. I thought it was
the cheating partner.
Yeah.
Can't remember. But there's moments where there's that scene where the two of them, she and her husband, are in bed together and teasing each other and playing each other, and that's really beautiful.
It is.
And so you can totally see like being a kind of a pivotal memory that you would return to all the time. And there's I watched the film Anomalisa recently, which is stop motion animation by Charlie Kaufman. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't.
It's on Netflix and you should watch it. It's really, really good. It's quite slow for the start, but it picks up, and it's about this guy who he's in his mid 40s, 50s, and he's kind of alone. He's a little bit estranged from his wife. And he sees everyone as the same. It's quite interesting. So like, he is unique, but everyone else in the world, male and female, all have the same face and the same voice, done by Tom Noonan. And he feels completely disconnected from the world. But then he meets this girl, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, I think, who is different, and they kind of connect. And there's this wonderful scene where they're in his hotel room, and they just kind of connect and fall in love and have sex, and it's amazing. Like, I mean, considering that the last film I saw with puppet sex was Team America, which is slightly different. It's an unbelievably beautiful scene, and it evolves, and it's romantic, and it's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, really.
Okay, and how does it connect with Annihilation?
It connects because it made me feel the same as just this really convincing, beautiful kind of depiction of two people in love and a romance. It really made me feel the same kind of thing.
I also want to underline the opposite, that it's also very unusual. So Natalie Portman has an affair with a colleague, who's also like a major scientist. And I forget the actor who plays him.
David Gaiazzi, I think.
But he's a black actor. And so what you see is kind of a really interesting interracial affair, and in a way made more interesting for me by the fact that it's cold, that it's a purely sexual thing, right? And that, there's a lot of, guilt and alienation attached to the sex that they have, right? And I thought that was kind of, I don't know, somehow brave for the filmmakers to cast it that way, to make it an interracial kind of affair. I thought that, the film is doing kind of really interesting, risky things with representation. So, Natalie Portman, all women on a mission, one of them is a lesbian, then kind of, her husband is a Latino, and the affair that she's having is with, a black guy. I thought it's a really interesting representational set of strategies that the film has that is most unusual. I had a moment where I was thinking, there's some kind of structuralist racist shit happening here, really, because there was a moment where I thought, the protagonist is Natalie Portman, what's her name? The doctor was dying of cancer.
Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Yeah, and so Jennifer Jason Leigh, who's very mysterious, but who is the other main figure in the film, really. So they're both like white, and then kind of all of the crocodile fodder is going to be Latino, Japanese, right? And then I realized, no, that's not quite true, because, I think there's four women that go with them, right? And they're
Five,
not...
I think.
Okay, 5.
I think she's the fifth of the
So, so they're not all...
There's Tessa Thompson, Tuva Novotny, Gina Rodriguez, Natalie Portman, and Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Yeah, anyway, one of them is white, so at least. So my theory that, kind of all the ethnic people were just like going to be crocodile fodder or its equivalent was wrong. Yeah, so I think the film is very rich and praiseworthy in those representational strategies that it's taken.
Yeah, Tuva Novotny's Swedish, apparently. You can't really get any whiter than that.
Yes. But the others?
Well, Gina Rodriguez is Hispanic.
Of course.
Latina. And Tessa Thompson is black.
Right.
As we know.
Yeah. So I thought that was great.
I do want to pick up on... Because it has been slightly on my mind, and I haven't really figured anything out about it, and it's quite important, which is the final scene. Everything going on with the doubling and the cloning and the way that the clone mirrors Natalie Portman's movements and eventually kind of becomes so. Really, I can't. I've been having trouble figuring out, making head or tail of it. What do you think of that?
Well, to me, I did think it was an alien life form, because there's a bit of a conversation, in which she says something like, so it's all choreographed, and initially it's very aggressive. Right, so I think Natalie Portman pushes her, then, her pushes her against the wall very aggressively. And I think there's a bit of dialogue where she says, she just reacted to my aggression.
Yeah, that's right. She was the one who came at her with aggression.
Yeah, that's right. So, and I suppose that's kind of, again, I have to see it again, because my feeling is that it did have an alien component to it, right? That, this was a sentient being,
yes,
responding. So...
that's what... Yeah, absolutely. I think I said earlier, when you get into the lighthouse, it's clear that there is an alien entity there that is driving something. I mean, you've seen earlier on, I think right at the start, this meteor flying through the sky and hitting this lighthouse and obviously going into the ground, and that's where this tunnel has emerged from. That's kind of the centre of it, and it's something that has come from outer space. That is generating the shimmer, which then generates mutation.
That's right.
But I just mean in terms, it's clearly the centerpiece of the film. It's what the film is heading towards.
Yes.
And
you're puzzled as to what it's
about.
Right. Well, my theory, and again, this would need to be tested with another viewing of the film, is that it actually has to do with that, with the, life on Earth is a construction that comes about from a single cell that breaks up and reproduces and mutates. And actually the film kind of makes that investigation into the cell being a cancer cell, i.e., something that kills and destroys, and sometimes from within, right? So if you look at the ending image, which is about, an earthling changed or already mutated, and an alien itself already mutated, creating something new. To me, it's kind of part of this theme of like a new form of life on Earth evolving, right? Out of this meeting, out of this mutation, out of this genetic mutation. So, it's not kind of, every ending has a beginning that's different. That's, that's my reading of it.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess what I'm struggling with then is why I think why should that be interesting, or what is the film actually trying to say about that? I'm struggling with that because I think it's actually not that interesting, I don't think it's saying anything that interesting or important or novel. I'm really stuck with it. Like I'm stuck as to I think the film is not really unclear about what it's showing you, but I don't think it's that meaningful. The other thing is I watched The Beach recently, which was Alex Garland's first screenplay based on his novel. It was directed by
I've seen it.
Directed by Danny Boyle, and I really loved it. I think it got a bad rap at the time, but I really loved it. And I think there's something about it which I related to it in this weird way, this kind of nostalgic way for something that I wasn't nostalgic for, because it was made in 2000, and it's full of sort of techno rave music, and it's about these kind of young people, this collective who explore this abandoned island that no one can really go to, and kind of there's like a Lord of the Flies thing going on. They build a life for themselves and create their own little society, and it's weird because there seems to be a type of culture that almost stopped basically around 9/11. Weirdly, I think that might. I don't mean it's not because of 9/11, but it's like this idea of kind of modern day free love, almost hippie revival with rave culture. Was in things like it was in The Beach, and it was in like The Matrix and Akira and Pi, almost, and things like this, like breakbeat music. It's kind of finds its way in all over the place, and it really evokes sort of mid to late 90s Western culture that just stops at the turn of the millennium. And I think it's like there was this kind of loss of innocence that happened with 9/11, where it was like all of a sudden we can't be doing that anymore. So there's this weird thing, like I never went to raves and stuff, I was too young to. But I somehow feel nostalgic for them watching The Beach. Like, because it evoked so much.
What does this have to do with?
No, I was just saying because it was. I just think that film just. I wanted to say that like really captured something that I think was like lost almost immediately. It's weird, like that. Like it's the kind of image of like what the future was going to be back then, and then it stopped.
Okay, I never read it that way.
That's what it feels like.
You know, I kind of.
And it's not related to this talk, but I just wanted to say it.
Okay, So let's just wrap up Annihilation. I mean, my own view of it is that I would like to see it again. You know, that it has like some great sequences, and that it might very well be a great film. You know, though I can't really quite tell because I can't tie up the pieces together on the first viewing. I thought, you know, the last 40 minutes were an extraordinary work of visual imagination.
Yeah, I don't think it hangs together very well. I think there are some interesting ideas and some very beautiful imagery, but I think actually I was really disappointed by it, to be honest. And I would rather watch Ex Machina again, and I'd rather watch Life, which, by the way, everyone should go and see Life. Life is really fucking good.
Okay, goodbye.